Mr. Trump, what would you say to the many local residents here who feel that you've run roughshod over planning legislation and environmental issues simply because you've got lots of money?
It's a very interesting question because, honestly, this is a very popular project. We've had great support from the council and great support from the political leaders. We've saved the dunes, and from an environmental standpoint, it's a much better situation than it was before we bought the site.
That's just a little bit from an incredibly interesting documentary about Donald Trump's attempts to build a world-class, quote-unquote, golf course in Aberdeen in beautiful Scotland, thereby disrupting the lives and the ecology of the local area, and he doesn't really care. It's called You've Been Trumped. We are joined by the director, Anthony Baxter, to talk about it more.
How are you?
Very well, thanks.
All right,
Yeah,
Anthony.
So you've been trumped officially. Maybe you can tell us about this film, and Mike mentioned it's about a golf course, but take it from there.
Yeah, well, I live in northeast Scotland, and Donald Trump announced some years ago now that he was going to build a golf course resort consisting of 1,500 houses, a skyscraper hotel, and 2 golf courses on what is a protected site, supposedly, an environmentally very, very sensitive site, one of the rarest stretches of moving sand dunes in the world.
Yeah, it's amazing, the
Europe.
footage of it, the before. I mean, you get a real idea of, the world's forces working on this place to make it special.
That's right, it is unique. And despite that, and despite it supposedly having protection, the Scottish government overturned its own strict environmental laws to give Donald Trump the go-ahead to build this golf course resort on the basis that it would provide lots of jobs for the local economy. And the local newspapers in particular were just running with this story all the time, saying jobs, 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 great to have Donald Trump in town doing this. And I just felt very differently that we had to explore the other side of the story. And there was one resident in particular who you'll see in the film who Donald Trump calls a pig and slams his house as being a slum.
Yeah, explain this man. His name is Michael?
Michael Forbes.
Michael Forbes. I've heard that name before.
My grandfather was a Forbes from Aberdeen, and for anyone that's ever been there, I mean, you have this image of Scotland in your mind, and that's exactly what it is. And when you're talking about skyscrapers, I mean, great place for a golf course, but with all these homes, it doesn't make sense. What do you think the thinking was of the Scottish government to overturn their own rules about keeping it environmentally sound there?
Well, they claim that it was going to create 6,000 jobs across Scotland. 1,400 local and permanent jobs was the mantra from the Scottish government.
And what's the unemployment rate?
1%.
1%.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't an
So it's
economy,
not solving
honestly.
a huge issue that the area of Aberdeen
Absolutely,
had.
absolutely. But you see, the government said that because the economic benefits were going to be so great, it warranted essentially destroying this very, very important environmental site, which I found extraordinary.
Well, and it started out very much being a film about the environment and protection. And really, as it goes along, it becomes this story that we're seeing shadowed all over the world now in Occupy Wall Street, and this idea of the wealth gap that exists between the 1% and the regular, everyday people. And that's really reflected in this film, that there's a certain hubris that seems to go along with money now.
I think you're right, and I think that's why it's been resonating, the story, so well with audiences, not only here in Canada, but across the United States and in Scotland as well. They're all over the world, as you say. People are trying to balance economic gain against environmental destruction. And that's what the film is really about.
And you were up against a lot of brick walls making this documentary. Maybe you can tell us about some of the problems with the Trump empire that you ran into. I mean, did you ever really get to interview Donald in the way that you wanted to? I mean, we see you chatting with him in the way we did in the clip, but did you ever get in touch with him to get a real response to all of this?
Oh, yes. I mean, we did. I approached the Trump Organization several times for an interview with Mr. Trump, and they declined the invitation several times. And so the only opportunity left open to me was to try and question him at news conferences, which is what I do. And then there is one part of the film where I've interviewed somebody from the Trump Organization, and then I'm arrested by the local police and put in jail for several hours. And we had our camera equipment confiscated, the footage confiscated, my DNA was taken, we had photographs taken. The National Union of Journalists took up the case and said it was unprecedented, that essentially we were bona fide journalists doing a professional job, and we'd been put in jail for no reason.
You can see the surprise not only of yourself as a filmmaker through this, but the local residents as well. It's a shock to see someone and a group of people being treated this way by anyone, whether it's their local government, their national government, or a foreign investor like Donald Trump. It's shocking.
It is shocking, and I think the local residents were feeling bullied. They were feeling harassed by the Trump organization. I mean, the reason we went to interview a representative of the Trump organization on the day we were arrested was one of the residents, Michael Forbes, and his elderly mother, who's 86 years old, had their water cut off mysteriously. And we never really understood why the water had been cut off, but it was, and they were without water for 10 days. And we felt that an elderly lady who's 86
That's
years
terrible.
old should not be without water for that.
Now, you mentioned the Scottish government overturning to allow this to happen, the Scottish newspapers themselves taking, the bright and shiny side of this story. What do you hope to achieve with your documentary showing the other side of things?
Well, the documentary was really an attempt to try and get to the truth of the development. It was essentially, as you say, we were getting one side of the story, and I felt it was important we at least attempted to try and get to the truth of the story. And really, I think it's up to people to make up their own minds, having seen the film. And as you say, it's playing here in Vancouver, the International Film Festival. And my main thought really when I introduced the film is just to say, look, I'm going to keep it really brief, just make up your own minds, please. You've seen it, and this is particularly relevant in Scotland where people have seen one side of the story. I say, please, just make up your own minds, having seen this side of the story, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards.
Now, you finished making the film in, I believe you said March or April this year. Where are things standing now with the development and the Donald's vision of this golf course? Is building continuing? What's happening?
Yeah, building is continuing. I mean, he flagged it up as being a £1 billion investment to begin with, but essentially all we have at the moment is one golf course. There is not a brick being laid, the housing has not been started, the hotel, and this is years after the talk and all the promises. So essentially all we have is a golf course.
And that means all the dunes have been moved, destroyed.
For maybe no reason?
Maybe.
Well, this is the trouble is, you see, you have these promises made and then none of the economic benefits.
There's no accountability.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
now you're going to the Hamptons Film Festival next week, which is Donald Trump's
home turf.
Stomping grounds. Have you been able, or are you going to be able to get a copy of the documentary to Donald Trump himself?
Well, Donald Trump came into Scotland a couple of weeks ago and said that he hadn't seen the film. He'd heard it was not good. He said that he'd heard, in fact, he said the word that was used was boring. But he said, if the filmmakers would like to give me a copy, then I'll watch it on my aeroplane, i.e. my 757 going back.
He had to drop the private plane bomb?
That's right, but we said, look, Mr. Trump may be used to getting special treatment, but we'd like him to come and see it in the cinema like everybody else.
Yeah.
So we've invited him and Donald Trump Jr. to our New York premiere, which, as you say, is at the Hamptons.
Fingers crossed. I would love to see that happen because I think it would be a revelation for him.
Well, I think
to see
it's
the
a
way
very
he treats
important
people.
documentary. Thank
Anthony,
you so much for joining us. Definitely check this documentary out. Very interesting story. It's called You've Been Trumped. It's got 3 screening times at VIFF. You can go to the VIFF website to find out all the info. Don't miss it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are occupying Wall Street and you're watching us on YouTube right now, why not take a little stroll down to Trump Tower down there and spend a little time outside and examine those things. Anthony,
Thanks again.
thank you. Really appreciate it. We're going to take a break.